Good evening. May I see your tickets, please? Thank you. Welcome aboard. Attention all passengers. We will now begin our entertainment for the journey. Please sit back and enjoy. I know what you're thinking. Just from the title, you've probably got your own mental image of what kind of person I am. You probably either see me as some sort of low-life scumbag who deserves whatever they got, or as an innocent victim of the system, forced into a lifestyle they never would have chosen if they had any other options. I'm not here to whine about a sob story of my life, or to apologize for my crimes. That's not what's important. I'm here about to tell you about the last house I ever burglarized. I was careful, you know? I didn't treat burglary as a quick way to get out of debt or something like that. It was a career to me. That's probably why I'd never gotten caught. I'd spend days just studying an area, looking at different houses, figuring out my strategies. Older rich folks were always the best targets. The young tech millionaires with their fancy smart homes and elaborate security systems were way too risky. But some retired grandma who thinks a bolt on her door is going to keep out folks like me, they were practically asking for it. Anyways, the last house was a bit of an odd one. I was walking through the suburbs looking for the next place to break into when, lo and behold, I saw it. The house itself was fairly plain, just your standard cookie-cutter suburban home. That wasn't what interested me. The bizarre thing was the garage. It was fully open, no car, and there was a single metal chair and trophy case on the inside. No other form of decoration, no toolbox, no storage, nothing. Just a metal chair and trophy case. Looking closer, I saw what looked like dozens of medals, trophies, and other sports paraphernalia. Now, for one thing, nobody ever keeps a garage like that. I've burgled dozens of homes, and never before have I ever seen anything remotely similar. There was always an odd bicycle, some cardboard boxes, etc. I decided to keep my eyes on this place for a couple of days, just to see if there was anything fishy going on. I watched the house like a hawk for 3 days, but nobody came in or out of it. Eventually, I figured that the owner must have headed off on vacation and forgot to close the door. Finally, I figured I'd just walk in and take the stuff. I waited till nightfall, just in case any neighborhood watch freaks were around just waiting on to report me for suspicious behavior. At about midnight, I got out of the car with a large sack and approached the open garage, a single bulb on its ceiling providing a bit of illumination in the sea of night. For a moment, I just stood in front of the house, contemplating how easy this all was. I'd like to say that I had a bad feeling, or maybe the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, but I didn't. The only thing running through my head was that I almost felt sorry for the poor schmuck I was about to rob blind. I crossed the threshold into the garage and approached the case, peering around to see if there was anything I missed from the outside. The only thing I could notice was that the open garage door had a strange texture on the underside, kind of like a chessboard patterning of squares made of alternating vertical and horizontal ridges. It didn't really seem relevant, so I ignored it. As soon as I reached the case, eyeing the numerous trophies and medals, there was a strange metallic sound from behind me. I whirled around, only to see the garage door rapidly closing. I sprinted towards it, trying to get out in time before it shut, but the door was strangely fast, way quicker than your average garage door. All I got from my trouble was a bump on the forehead as I ran face first into the strangely patterned paneling. I looked around the garage for a button to open the garage door, but was with no luck. The walls were barren. There wasn't so much as a light switch to turn on the single incandescent bulb that hung over the metal chair. I was horrified that the owner of the house would arrive to find me in their home. I wasn't a strong person, and the thought of either needing to fight someone off or get the cops called on me was utterly nerve-wracking. I tried to grab a chair as some sort of ancient weapon, only to find that it was bolted to the floor. Instead, I reached inside the display case, grabbing the heaviest looking object I could find. To my surprise, the heavy looking trophy I grabbed turned out to be just cheap plastic. I reached for another, only to find the same thing. Looking closer, each of the medals and trophies were just cheap plastic or wooden replicas, spray painted a lustrous gold. Seeing as my options were limited, I simply waited by the door leading into the rest of the house, fists at the ready. I hoped that I'd have the element of surprise on my side, that maybe I'd get a swift punch in and run out through the front door once the owner was reeling on the floor. I waited 10 minutes before I realized no one was coming. Feeling a little stupid, I tried opening the door to the rest of the house. I figured that maybe the garage door closed automatically due to a motion sensor or something. It didn't budge. I tried slamming my shoulder into it, but only succeeded in hurting myself. It felt like there was a barricade on the other side. I walked over to the garage door, rubbing my sore shoulder and swearing under my breath. I tried to lift up the door with my bare hands, only to find it seemed to be locked into place. I suddenly became aware that I was completely trapped in this person's garage. I never brought my phone when I was on the job, so to speak. I was always worried the cops would use it to trace my location, or that I would get a ring while I was in the middle of pilfering some geezer's old coin collection. Now, however, I was starting to wish I had some form of communication. Then at least I could at least try calling a buddy or two to try and help me get out of this mess. Instead, I was stuck. Time passes slowly when you don't have much to occupy yourself. For the first day or so, I remember I was pretty violent. I smashed up the trophy case as best I could and shouted until my throat was hoarse. I pounded against both the door to the house and the garage door itself. Any fear of getting caught was rapidly overwhelmed by a desire to survive. By the second day, I figured out what the strange paneling on the garage door was. It was soundproof tiles. I gave up yelling pretty soon after that. Do you know how long a human being can last without water? About 3 days. It's not like I brought a water bottle with me when I was breaking into people's homes, so I knew I wouldn't last long. That's what finally broke me. That's what made my willpower evaporate. By the time my captor finally decided to show himself, I could barely move. I didn't even react when he jabbed me with a needle and everything went black. When I woke up, I found myself tied down to the chair with some cheap nylon rope. I immediately tried to struggle free from my bonds, but I couldn't move, not even an inch. It's not like I was anesthetized. I could still feel the coarseness of the rope and the cool metal of the chair, but it was as if my mind and body were completely disconnected. My eyes strained in their sockets, and I saw 2 separate ID drips running into my arm. One was full of some sort of clear liquid, while the other was an opaque red. The guy who knocked me out was nearby, humming to himself as he stood over a card table. I didn't get a good look at him earlier. I was too delirious from dehydration, but now I could focus enough to get a fairly clear view of my tormentor. He was short, maybe 5'5" or 5'6", with pale skin and a shock of blonde hair. He was wearing all black, from his boots to his shirt, with surgical gloves on his hands. Well, almost black anyway. When he turned around, I realized he was wearing the white collar of a priest. Most of his face was covered with a surgical mask, but I could see his eyes. Dear God, those eyes. As long as I live, I never want to look into those eyes ever again. There was this look of sadistic hunger in them, a horrible, evil desperation. The excitement in his gaze bordered on sexual, and I was incredibly, horribly aware of just how utterly helpless I was. It took me a moment to notice the objects he was holding in those gloved hands. In his right, he clutched a cheap hacksaw, and in his other, he held a blowtorch. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't move even an inch. My eyes began to search around the room wildly, desperately seeking a savior, something to protect me. But there was nothing. I was completely, entirely alone. This man shuffled towards me, seemingly almost nervous in his disposition, like some shut-in geek trying to ask a crush on a prom date. Even through his mask, I could hear him lick his lips before speaking. "And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee. For it is profitable for thee that the one of the members shall perish, and not that of thy whole body should be cast into hell," said the man in an airy, high-pitched voice. Almost reverently, he gently placed the hacksaw against the wrist of my right arm. For a moment, he just held it there, looking into my eyes as I stared into his. I tried to beg him to stop with a look, but again, all I could see was that awful predatory need in his eyes. He then began to cut. People talk about agony, about pain. They step on a nail or break their finger and they wail and cry and whine. They don't know jack about pain. They don't know what it feels like to have a jagged, serrated blade rip through their flesh like a piece of raw steak. I couldn't even scream. I just had to sit there as I felt part of myself being severed. I sat in perfect silence as I felt a blade tear through bone, denied even the right to cry out for the suffering being inflicted upon me. I barely even noticed when he used the blowtorch to cauterize the wound. After he finished with my hand, he shuffled over to the table again, setting down his saw and blowtorch. Tears were streaming down my face, but I still couldn't move or speak. He came back with a cordless soldering iron and started burning something into my forehead. I could feel each leather as he worked, tracing a message written in pain among my own flesh. When he finished, he set down the soldering iron and produced another syringe. "One day," the man spoke, loathsome satisfaction infesting his high-pitched voice, "you will thank me." With that, he once again jabbed me with a needle, and everything faded into blackness. I woke up on the side of the road next to the hospital, screaming in agony. Fortunately, whoever this freak was, he seemed to do a fairly good job of keeping my wound clean. There was no infection, and he wrapped it up tightly with gauze before dropping me off on the road. I told the police what happened, of course, and they looked into it, though begrudgingly. I heard one officer mutter out, "If you ask me, they got what they deserved," as they left the room. I didn't care. I don't give a damn what those pigs think of me. They didn't find anything substantial, of course. Oh sure, there was enough evidence to prove my story. The chair, the hacksaw, a puddle of blood, they were all there. Hell, even the soundproof paneling was still in place. But there wasn't a trace of the man who did this to me. The house was apparently the property of some real estate company. It was supposed to be up for sale for all they knew. Of course, nobody had been to the property in a couple of weeks, so they figured someone broke in and set up shop. I don't really think the cops tried to look too hard for the captor, if I'm being completely honest. In their eyes, it was just one more crook off the street. I got arrested shortly after, and I was charged with multiple counts of theft. At the advice of my lawyer, I pleaded guilty, and I've been in prison ever since. After all, who's just gonna take the side of someone with the word thief branded into their forehead? Our journey comes to an end once again, and we thank you for joining us on A Train to Nowhere. The passenger's name who left us with this story today was a priestess of spiders, and we thank her greatly for her contribution to this train's wonderful entertainment. We thank you so much for joining us, and we encourage you to come by once again if you would rather hear more stories. If that is the case, you are encouraged to go and listen to many of the other stories that have been left here with the Conductor. And until next time, we thank you for joining us. Goodbye.